She has been a pioneer in research on the influence of Indian philosophy and literature on Polish literature. She will be talking about translation of Tagore's poem Gītāñjali into Polish and what difficulty schedule with that translation. Now I invite Madalena to speak about her own research and thereafter the presentation. Every speaker will get 20 minutes time and followed by 5 minutes of discussion.
So, namaste. I have a great pleasure tonight to present my No? Please excuse me, I'm not used to it. It is not like everyday situation. So again, namaste. I have a great pleasure to present cognitive research on translation of Rabindranath's poetry. Yesterday I introduced the subject of Jan Kasprowicz and in connection with Tagore, poet of Polish modernism, who translated Rabindranath Tagore, Gītāñjali and Madalena, his poetry into the Polish language. And under the influence of this translation, he also created his own poetry, the whole collection, the book of the poor. So the whole metaphorization process, concepts, he took from Gītāñjali and from Madalena, from Rabindranath Tagore. But actually the very subject is more complex. In my research, I'm interested how certain philosophical and cultural concepts travel culturally through languages, how they are adapted. And in this case, the travel is immense because Tagore, writing Gītāñjali, was also inspired by Rig Veda. There are various sources of inspiration for Tagore, but one of very important concepts was Rig Veda. I can even point particular mantras that inspired particular songs in Gītāñjali. So from Sanskrit we go to Bengali language, original Tagore's songs. Then his translation into the English language is already adaptation into Western culture. And finally, Jan Kasprowicz translation into the Polish language, because Kasprowicz didn't know Bengali, so he went through the English medium. But today we'll go both through Bengali, English and Polish. So I have a cognitive attitude towards my research. This allows me to go beyond the language. So when we approach metaphor cognitively, we think about concept. So we can have different images expressing the same idea. For instance, fruits of action or flowers of action. The concept is the same, right? Image is different, but the concept is the same. And cognitive linguistics also offers conceptual analysis of mental processes that are behind conceptualization and behind the whole process of translation, which is very important because we can recreate how certain philosophical concepts, cultural concepts were created. So this is by the way of introduction. And in this presentation, I would like to show how certain concepts from Sanskrit tradition, Sanskrit poetics, were introduced into Polish modernism and into Polish poetry, because there is a huge influence of India on Polish modernism. So I would like to start with Sanskrit poetics. Can you? Yeah, it's not very careful the situation. Can you go to Sanskrit? Yeah. We can stay with Bharat theory, because obviously Sanskrit poetry is a huge concept, and for me, the most interesting in my research is whatever is connected with semantics. Not form, but semantics, because this is what goes into translation with special power. So we have few theories that are relevant for the concept of translation and which actually influence immensely Polish modernism and literary concepts. So we have Bharata theory of rasa bhava, the concept of rasa, so this aesthetic flavor that is the most important in poetry, originally in Natya Shastra, in dramas, but then it was extended to other genres. And this is so important because we go beyond word-to-word concept. We go to the contextual concept of understanding and feeling and receiving piece of art. So this also allows us to go beyond the language because we are supposed to create and recreate this aesthetic flavor. There is one. Can you go further with slides? There's one more very important concept here that was introduced by Bharat. This is Sadharani Karana and Sahidraya concept. This is very important because in Europe we have this habit of interpreting poetry on our own. You have your own opinion on everything, and also on poetry. No such a thing in the case of rasa. The thing is that the genius and the talent of poets should be of such a kind that creates such poetry that evokes the same rasa, conveys the same rasa in every person, right? So this is impossible to create, for instance, bhakti rasa, but to experience another kind of rasa. This is kind of misunderstanding. There's something wrong either with the receiver or with the poetry, right? So you're supposed to be sahidraya, so one with the heart, with the offer, to be as close with your heart as it is possible with your identifier. And Ananda Vardhana, he introduced the concept of dvanya, so suggestion. So again, we have contextual meaning. Sanskrit is implied. This is beyond metaphor. I just recently created cognitive models of certain metaphorization process, and I could see how metaphor is limited, right? So metaphor is just an, I would say, stimuli for implied context. And Abhinavagupta combined the concept of rasa dvanya. So he claimed that you need dvanya, suggestion, to convey rasa. So this is a very important idea. There's also the concept of theory of memory, which is very important here. I wanted to mention it because, in my opinion, this is the first context where you can trace cognitive linguistics. So this is literary theory, but already with potential of cognitive linguistics, because according to Abhinavagupta, you learn emotions from experience, but your experience, your personal experience, is pushed into your subconsciousness. So what remains on the surface are traits. They're either latent or awakened. And this is how dvanya works in poetry. So dvanya is supposed to awaken the right traits so that you could experience rasa, right? But without those personal experiences. So for instance, if you watch drama, and you can see some love scene, so you are supposed to identify with those protagonists without reliving your own personal experience. So that's the idea, right? And here comes transcreation theory. This is very important because actually transcreation concept comes from Sanskrit tradition. So in Europe, most researchers say that this was actually Brazilian concept, but this is not true because we have origins in Sanskrit tradition. Purushottam was the first who coined the very word transcreation. Transcreation is creative translation. So Sanskrit tradition was completely against translating one to word, right? So against formal translation. So we are supposed to find equivalent suggestion in the target language to convey the same original rasa. And this is exactly what Tagore also says. So he says that every culture has its own images, metaphors. So we have one type of suggestion in the original text, and we need to find equivalent to different type of suggestions, different type of dvanya in the target language, but to convey the same rasa. Right? So, can I have another? Why is it so relevant here? This is very relevant to young Poland and Polish modernism, because the idea of suggestion and mood was incredibly important in Polish poetry of that period. So they took it just directly from Sanskrit tradition. That was the time of Indiomania. They translated Rig Veda, Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita. They were coming out new translations, and also there was a huge interest in poetics. So those two things, those two concepts, suggestion, dvanya, and mood, that comes from rasa, is in Polish modernism. So can I have another slide? Yes. So coming back to Jan Kasprowicz and Tagore, I created a kind of a juxtaposition to show you explicitly what kind of equivalences we can find here. So on the On the side of Tagore, we have definitely dłani and suggestion. So this is the same concept. It's just Polish, as English name of the same term. So priority of implied meaning. So this is contextual meaning. So we don't go for word for word. We don't even go for metaphor and particular metaphors, but just the whole context. Rasa. So in Polish, it would be more mood, but it's again aesthetic emotion. So this is equivalent notion. And there's one more thing that I would like to point your attention to. There are two factors that are blended in Tagore's poetry. This is Vedic tradition and folk tradition. Right? And the same situation we have in the case of Kasprowicz, Christian, so religious-rooted tradition, and Polish folk tradition. And this is not incidental. It is not that Kasprowicz just blended those two fields, two contexts incidentally. It was just under influence of Rabindranath Tagore. He just read Gītāñjali. He knew that the context of Gītāñjali are Vedic and they also have folk roots, and he took the same concept, right? And spirituality is simplicity. This is what is the effect of this combination. So the form of the poetry is supposed to, poems are supposed to be very simple, but the content, this implied content, is very deep and multi-level. So this is why Tagore says that my songs put off adornments, right? And now this is why when you go to the temple, we are supposed to be modest and look modest, because we have all those jingles, and all those jewelry. It somehow mars our union with God. So this is the concept of simplicity, brings you near to the divine. Okay? Okay, can I have another slide? So I would like to discuss it in a more precise way on the example of one concept, which is lila and will. You'll be surprised why we lila and will, but there is a reason for it. So lila, okay, maybe I will first quote yes. So that is the idea that it comes from the process of translation. So this is the first song from the English collection, and this is actually from Gītāñjali originally, because Tagore didn't really translate Gītāñjali from Bengali into English. There are some 60 songs taken originally from Gītāñjali. There is from Gītāñjali and other sources. So this is actually from Gītāñjali. So we have this opening verses. Amare tumi oshe skorecio, emoni lila tobo, foraje fele abar bohorecio, zibom nobo. Koto ze giri, koto ze nodi tire, berale bohi cioccio e bashi tire, koto ze tam bazale fire, kahare tahakobo. Tomari ai omritto poreshe, amar hiak hani, haraloshima bipul horeshe, utchli utchebani. Amar shutchu ekti mutchi bhori, dite chodam, dibash bibhabori. Holona shara, kotona juk dhori, kebolo ami lovo. It sounds so sweet. I mean, one class Mishti Bhasha, right? This is, So as you can imagine, this is absolutely impossible to recreate it into the English language. So Tagore, Tagore was aware of it, so he had this concept that every language has not only different metaphorization process, but different melody and rhythm. So he considered English better for poetic prose. So can you have another slide? So this is how he translated. Thou hast made me endless. This is actually a little archaic English. We don't say thou, right? But he tried to imitate, the mood. So thou hast made me endless, such is thy pleasure. This frail vessel thou emptiest again and again, and fillest it ever with fresh life. This little flute of reed thou hast carried over hills and dales, and hast breathed through it melodies eternally new. At the immortal touch of thy hands, my little heart loses its limits in joy and gives birth to utterance ineffable. Thy infinite gifts come to me only on these very small hands of mine. Ages pass, and still thou pourest, and still there is room to fill. Nice, that's beautiful, really. So, I have quotation with the Polish language because there's no sense to take it back to English because we have to just quote Tagore again. I can only say that uczyniłeś mnie bezkreślnym, taka jest haństwa I wola. Maybe I will not read the whole thing because you will not understand anyway. I will just discuss it. So in the original we have Amare tu mi osie skorecio, amoni lila, to było lila. We have the concept of lila, and Tagore translated into thy pleasure. And Kasparowicz says, such is thy will. So now we will go through those concepts and we'll see how relevant they are and why they are such choices. So obviously Tagore couldn't use the concept of lila because no one would understand it in English, right? So he wanted to convey some sense, some taste of this meaning into the English language to bring the receiver closer to the original concept. So while lila is pleasure, lila is creation, right? And yes. So we have this idea of the joy of a creator who creates out of joy, out of love, ananda, right? Totally different concept in Christianity when God is detached, demanding, commanding. Yes, this is a different concept. So this is why Tagore says pleasure. This is pleasure. The creator has pleasure in creating this reality. And why is it so that Kasparowicz says will? Is it relevant? So let's have a look at the concept of will in Christianity and in Hindu tradition. In Christianity, basically this is about free will. We also have the will of God, like a decision. God takes some decision, commands, this is his will, but mostly we refer to free will, this moral choice, but this is always burden. We are created and left with moral obligation to choose the right path, right? They're completely alone. And how is it in Upanishadic tradition? So if we start with Kena Upanishad, we start with cosmic will. So will is connected with lila, with creation. This is this creative will. This is actually what Schopenhauer also takes in his philosophy. Can I have another slide, please? So in Chandogya Upanishad, I'm sorry for the Vanakari, but somehow my PDF cannot manage it properly, so please excuse this. Chandogya Upanishad develops it into Sankalpa. So this is this energy, this fire that fuels our sense and our action. This is this hearing behind hearing, seeing behind seeing. Yes. Schopenhauer actually was inspired by this concept of will. Just he loved Upanishads. He used to say that it was a consolation for his life. Yes. So can I have another? And it goes back actually to Rigvedic tradition. The concept of Agni, right? So will is fire. This is what fires up into existence. Actually, there's one very interesting, from cognitive point of view, kind of interesting metaphor and kind of juxtaposition equivalence that we can find, because in Yajna we have the concept of fire. Okay, we offer the concept of oblation and fire, and if you think about human organisms, we have digestive fire also. Okay, so fire is also within us, and Atma is fiery, right? So this is an internal transference of an outer ritual. So we already have this concept of inner ritual in the altar and in the sacrifice already in Rigveda, right? Because some researchers say that it only comes later with later Upanishad. Not true. It's already, we have this concept in Rigveda. And of course I also mentioned karmic will, but in this context it will not be important because Tagore actually addresses creative force, so definitely it is about cosmic will of creation. And now there is another question. Is it possible that the choice that Kasparowicz made was in accordance with Rabindranath Tagore's concept of lila? Is it possible that Tagore also translated lila as will? Yes, he did it. So in another song, we can see that Tagore, on the left-hand side, we have ki niro ki aji ki ofuron lila, so like an exhaustible lila, unlimited lila, so lila cannot be exhausted. And in English, because maybe I'm not reading the whole because we are running out of time. In English translation, Tagore says, "But I find that thy will knows no end in me." So Tagore also translates lila into will. Why? So because he knew Upanishads very well. He was very well educated in Indian philosophical religious texts. So this is not coincidence. This is intertextual context, but is compressed into philosophical and here also poetic context. And what Kasparowicz does here, he uses also the concept of will, because that was very easy for him, but he uses stylistically totally different. So Tagore says that your will is unlimited, meaning that your that you are as the essence, as this fire, you will burn limitlessly in me. But Kasparowicz says that you have no end in me, if I were to translate it, such is thy will. Huh? This is different rhetoric. So this is more Christian rhetoric. So you have no end in me, but this is your command, right? So what I'm trying to show you, that every translation is cultural adaptation, and on the one hand, keeps the juice, the essence of the original, but on the other hand, I would say, takes it a little bit further and further away from the original concept. So now there is a question: is rasa the same? Do we have the same rasa in the original text, and do we have the same rasa in the translated text? I would say no. I would say that in original text this is ananda rasa, this is joy of creation. But what Kasparowicz did, this is like more bhakti rasa, devotion. Okay, I give myself to you. Okay, so he received different kind of emotional aesthetics, but he needed to do it because we don't have concept of joy in connection with God, tasting God. Yes, because for Krishna even, you can be a lover, friend of Krishna, everything, right? We don't have it, right? So he needed to adjust it to the context of his contemporary people, right? Because otherwise it wouldn't be received well, right? It wouldn't be understood at all. This is a conceptual, actually, diagram of conceptual processes, cognitive processes that are behind translation process. So the thing is that we have some introductory, some source concept, and we need context that is like a soil, I would say, for this original context. It is blended. So like in the context, in the example of Lila, we put it into the context of Polish culture. It is blended with this culture. Yes, it's blended. And finally we have the outcome. So I think I managed to keep the discipline of time. Okay. So thank you very much. It was my pleasure.
Thank you very much, Professor Joanna. It was, in a way, primer to the whole Sanskrit politics also. This lesson is evolution that, and like Tagore has been writing not only in Bengal, but he himself translated some of the poems of Gītāñjali. And I was fascinated by what he has been saying. Kasparowicz, he brings the term Bola in place of Leela. But when Tagore is translating Leela into English, he himself is writing will. So in a way, this whole this three words itself becomes a poetic combination. Leela plus will become Bola. La from there and this. So this problem of translation has been in every culture, and as we are aware, like in China, when this issue of came. So the Sanskrit text, once these started getting translated, and they didn't have the concept India tradition had. So they started imposing their own concept, and finally Chinese tradition, they moved away from Sanskrit text, and they said we don't want to translate. It is going to be only not textual translation and transmission, but only mind-to-mind transmission. So they just bypass the whole Indian Sanskrit tradition after 19th century. Second thing, what I would just like to say that, like you were saying, that this will and about the will in the Vedas, and how this will is also connected with fire. Okay. See, in the Chandogya Upanishad itself, there is a Mahavakya, Sarvam Khalu Idam Brahma. There if you see, there is a very interesting, because the fourth phrase, they said, At Khalu Kratu Maya Puso Yatha Kratu Asmi Loke. Like whatsoever, like indeed, you have the man, person, he is made up of desires, and whatsoever he desires, that is one of the meaning. The word becomes like that. But Kratu has a lot of meanings. Kratu has a meaning of will, desire, intention, even fire. So this is interesting that in Sanskrit, one word can be used in different contexts. So maybe sometimes it can be used as will also, sometimes it can be used as sacrificial fire, or sometimes it can be used as inner fire, which Tagore has always been in quest of, because finally it was his inner fire which kept him guiding. And I remember one of his poetry in Gītāñjali, Kothai Alu. Okay, where is the light? Where is the light? And he said this light comes from the flame of love, and that flame of love comes by burning of your prana. So that is one of the very beautiful the poetry of Tagore. And that inner fire, after 1920s, when he goes to South Asia, at that time he did hear that poem Borobudur, and he said, who is that inner fire and Jivan Devta? Then he said, Buddher Sanan Loilang. That is his very famous poetry of 1927, that let Buddha be my refuge. So now I just open up for some questions on her beautiful presentation.
Thank you for so inspiring. Myself being from Poland, I did not know that at all. But what I want to remark on one thing, that in Polish language, vola is not felt in the same way as will in English. And vola, we have like wolny, freedom. So it is more close to swatantrata. In Sanskrit, we have free will. It's not will, because in English we like a kind of force is there. But in Veena there is no force. And this is like only the effect is there without any effort. And even in after looked at one place, and he quoted that the creation, but you also mentioned your very good text, the creation was without, we quoted this because it was it is from Ramanuja, from Shishtadvaita, that the creation was created by being, because if the God would use force to create, effort to create, he would not be able to do so many things. So, like this.
So vola, we can say creativity.
Yes.
But often talks about God as an artist.
Yes.
I enjoy your construction of paper very much. What I want to say is, these are philosophical nuances, and it's not so much the word, it's really, as you said, the context. And we talk of, when we speak of it's self-born will. There's no external pressure which creates it. So it becomes a philosophical, it is very nuanced. The other thing is, when one explores the Sanskrit language and Indo-European languages, they have their counterparts. Because Indo-European languages trace to many words in Sanskrit. So I was wondering whether that has an impact on translation. I don't know whether my question is it's a complicated question.
Absolutely. In my research, I go beyond language. If I stuck to the language, I wouldn't go anywhere. So that is why I am completely linguistic. I think that's conceptual. So language would limit me. Right? It would be like an ornament, as the guy says. Just more
Can be Chinese approach of bypassing languages.
But you need to do it. Otherwise,
So we will continue with the discussion.
Sir, may I ask one question? My question is that Tagore himself translated these songs, and then he took them to the Ruby.
The director of MK Mahatma Gandhi Center, she has worked on Gandhi Global UGC, Gandhi activism, and she has been a frequent speaker on global conferences. Apart from that, she is also related with the Parliament of the World Religion. Her topic is Dharma dilemma, traditional principles and modern challenges.
Thank you so much. Namaste, and thank you for coming early this morning. So I will just straight dive into my topic with a question. The question is, are people becoming less ethical in today's world? Please raise your hands. Yes, raise your hands. No, stick. Put your hand down. No, big hand. Yes, are becoming less ethical? Some are we becoming more ethical than raise your hands? No one raises hand. So this is Dharma dilemma we're going to talk about. So 54% in the US say the moral values are poor, and 33% say that only fair. 83% think that US moral values are getting worse. And 74% of Republicans say moral values are poor. 97% say that they are worsening. So it said there is a problem, right? This is a recent polls. So this is a topic was views of state. I'm going to put it like that I can see it properly. In US at new low. And when I come to India and they say, well, the US is very, very honest people, and this is, we are talking about US. So it's not just any particular region problem, it seems like a global problem. In India, the International Journal of Advanced Research in Science, Communication, Technology writes, moral values are dying out among Indian youth. And they cite many ways that they have collected data that the moral values are dying. I recently read an article in New York Times that said in the US, if the students were given a chance to plagiarize, cheat in the exams, 90 or 80% will cheat if they were not get caught. So it is very, very interesting. We see Gandhi's story of his teacher is asking him to copy from the book of his friend. So this is very fascinating, the idea of ethics, morality, and lack thereof. So today we have a crisis of moral deficit. And is it today? Every generation says we are going down. Every generation says. So I think we can look at with our present condition and then judge from there. So is the concept of dharma relevant today? That's my question. And does the idea of dharma as duty put constraints on personal progress? Because when I was growing up in India and they said, oh, this is your dharma, just do it. This is your dharma, your son's dharma, your daughter's dharma. And then we ask, how about me? What's my personal desires, my personal focus, what I want to do? What do I have to get constrained by these duties? So the first is, how do we understand dharma in today's world? Everybody knows the term dharma because it's pan-Indian, pan-Indic term, but do we understand? So this is the dharma encounter when I went to the United States, and it's getting better and better. Can you see where are these symbols are found? They're tattoos. They're canvassed on the bodies of Americans. So you see, tapas is the band, the Levine, he's the very, I didn't show the full chest, bare chested, big tapas. And is that, so it's kind of fascinating to see moksha karma, dharma on the ankle. And of course, there's a book called Dharma Bums. So I just wanted you guys to wake up this morning, not be just bored, listen. I know we have a wonderful talk by Joanna, and for very deep philosophical. So I'm going to go philosophy through humor. I heard that from a professor in my master's in the US. They said, philosophy without humor is blasphemy. So I'm going to make fun, that Leela, let's play Dharma. So Dharma Bumps is a book, the guys who are, left everything and they go around and live easily and lightly and they live their wonderful life. So here we are. And dharma is generally understood in the Indian context. Dharma based on one's birth, ashrama, system in life, obligation. You must do this. I always heard that as a child. Ye to karna hi padega. Ye to hona hi hai. This is meant to happen. You have to do this. And just really obligation. And doing the right thing. You have to do what dharma is, following a moral life. And dharma as religion. What is your dharma? Many times my dharma is Buddha dharma, Sikh dharma, so on and so forth. But dharma has been misunderstood in the Western context. So I put a lot of information in a 20-minute presentation, so you can always ask me questions after that. So Dharma is contextual. Say, well, in this situation it's okay to work, but in the other situation, you don't have to do it. So it's like, no. Kant says the ethics is what you must do always in all situations. And they sort of did not like the idea of dharma as the ethics as understood in the West. A dharma system does not differentiate between rational ethical system and social obligation. So the Western philosophy, Western ethical systems differentiate the two. And they think that dharma is more living a social life, more in the aligned with the cosmic order, but not as a rational ethical, why I should do this because it rationally makes sense and it's good for the society and good for me. The term is good is used quite a bit. And we don't see the word good in Indian philosophy. Any tradition, we say well-being, we say ananda, we say, freedom, but the good, what is good? Is Krishna good? Let's talk about that. The idea of good is kind of problematic. That's why we have in Western theology that people want to really say, if God is all good, then why there is suffering? Why God? So then there is problems arise with that. Dharma rules are not independent of their consequences. So one has to think about the consequence, what will happen before doing your duty. So it's really sometimes lying is permissible because it has a better consequence when we lie. Sometimes killing is better consequence. So it's really consequences are implicated in the dharma ethics. And dharma is dependent of religious frameworks. That's a very important that the Western ethicists say that dharma is always in relation to what religions say, what their philosophies say, not simply because I'm just going to do it because I'm going to do it. So that's just a very simple summary. And then I began to think about what is dharma. I was teaching religions of India in the United States. I will spend many classes to say why Hinduism is not a religion the way we understand Christianity or Islam or Judaism. So I will just take out all these ways that to explain what is dharma it is. So I wrote a book so that we can all understand and I can use that in my class. So very simply put, I really go to the root word on dharma. It really comes to my rescue. The dharma is hold, sustain, to support, and that. So say, what is my dharma? What sustains us? What holds us? What makes a life better? And not just my life better, but the better of people around me. And there is no one English equivalent, and that I will come back to later. Why there is no one translation of dharma? Talking about translation, right? Leela to will and to pleasure and to kama. What is going on here, right? What is going on in this? And there is no term for religion in Indian traditions as well. So it's generally translated as duty, law, truth, virtue, ethics, right path, nature, etc., depending on the different philosophical religious systems. And how we understand that meaning is in the context. So when we read the Mahabharata, when we read the Ramayana, we read the Dharma Shastra, we understand in what context the word dharma is used. So to making the first category clear and concise, so I'm just going to give a quick summary and then we're going to go into dharma dilemma. So dharma as religion is not circumscribed by one set of theological concerns. It is demarcated by any set doctrine. So it doesn't have a one, you must do this because you're a Hindu. There's so many ways to be one called Hindu dharma. And dharma is, as a knowledge system, is inherently dialogical and dialectical. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is telling Arjuna, the second chapter, hey, get up and fight. And Krishna says, excuse me, I have more questions. God is talking to you. And even then, he keeps on asking questions, even after he shows his divine form. Come on, stop then. He continues his, till another, 6-7 chapters. Any other traditions, God comes, okay, bow down, okay, I do it, sir. But here, huh? Right, and it's such in a way that it allows us to debate and think through it, the difficult ideas. As a lived reality, it frustrates the division between sacred and secular. What is sacred and what's secular? Sometime this Rajkumari Amrit Kaur was raised, lived as a Christian, and they cremated him when he died. They said, oh well, now she's passed away, so we'll do the Sikh or cremation. Because it doesn't have that kind of sacred secular. It's just very open in a way that everything can be sacred. It doesn't have to be, you have to do a religion in church or one time or one place. And Dharma as a belief system encompasses pluralistic tendencies. And then my students get so confused. Is it one God and many gods? Oh, you can have either. What do you mean by you can have either? Can you just tell me which one is right? I said, no, neither one is wrong. So I don't know what the right is, but I don't think they're the wrong. So I think it's just really, I had to think about, so I really have to be representative of what Dharma is in my classroom and in my teaching and my writing. And Dharma framework defies spiritual religious bifurcation. I don't know whether you know this term called SBNR. SBNR. Oh my God, come on. Every student knows me. Spiritual but not religious.
Oh yeah.
Spiritual but not religious. I'm a spiritual but not religious. What do you mean by that? You can be spiritual and religious both, or not religious in Dharma traditions. It doesn't map onto the Dharma traditions, the idea of, because religious is considered here dogmatic religion, that you have to adhere to the command of a God. And then lastly, which will be the topic of my presentation, is relevant. It's comprehensive and relevant. And some say that it is not relevant, but it is very, I will show that why it is relevant in today's world. All right, so there are, Dharma dilemma is many sides of, we are blind people, we are trying to figure out, some say elephant is a fan, some say the elephant is a wall, it's a Jain parable, Buddhist parable, in many different traditions. It comes with different points of views. You ask 5 people what Dharma is, you get 7 answers, because it is just a very nuanced, very different ways to think about this idea. So what does Dharma mean to me? It boils down to me, as I'm studying it, because I live in 2 cultures every day. Every single day I have my reality exists in 2 worlds, every single day. So I ask, what ought I to do? And Dharma is, end of the day, living, how I live. Reclaiming Dharma for the modern world. That will be my presentation. So I always turn to ancient wisdom, and you say Dharma is always taught through narratives. And narratives are Dharma in practice. Stories, of course we have Dharma Shastras, but Dharma Shastras just kind of confusing for a lot of people, and then there are a lot of stories who supplement it and they tell us, oh, that's what it means now. A Brahman is one who has a pure conduct, let it be from any class or station comes from, right? So I think it's that we get stories that we are commentary, as we see in Jewish tradition, there is a commentaries, but it's commentaries and narratives. And the trolley example in Western ethics, right? The Western ethics says if a trolley brakes fail, then you have 5 people on the one side and 2 people on the this side. Which one would you say? 5 or 2? And they all think it's a really, really interesting example. But in trolley is the easy one. Never is easy, Dharma dilemma. But look at the Bhagavad Gita war, where there is hundreds of thousands of people who are going to lose lives. Hundreds of thousands, men were going to, and what will happen to women, we never talk about that. So there is a serious problems that Dharma ethics deal with that. And then we have 2 famous statements. Dharmo rakshati dharma, that who protects Dharma is, Dharma protects them. And some think that just we should defend our religion. And I think that's a very, very narrow reading of Dharma rakshati dharma. And I will show why. We're just not just going here a religious crusade when they're saying Dharma. It really is, when we follow a life of Dharma, we are protected. And I can say for my own life that when I follow Dharma principles, I am protected. Because we see today's world, the politicians are doing all kinds of lies and cheating and all kinds of skeletons in the closet, and then they're always hiding because not living the life of Dharma. And the second is Tharyati Dharma. So very, very simply put, how succinct these examples are. That which sustains is Dharma, or that which is worthy of sustaining is Dharma. So if somebody says to me, do your Dharma, and I don't like it, don't feel right, then don't do it. It doesn't mean that if ought to do something, it's always right. So one can have a dissent, the voice of. And the scriptures, Indian texts, allow that, many, many examples. So different kinds of dharmas, of course, dilemma questions, varnashrama dharma, national dharma, family dharma, manav dharma, or sadharana dharma, and individual dharma fulfill one's calling. And the problem with Arjuna is he thinks that he's doing conflicted with the family dharma, he's conflicted with his kshatriya dharma, he's conflicted with his individual dharma at that time because he's depressed and he's despondent. So there is a lot of conflict is happening. It's not just the Bhagavad Gita. If you read the Mahabharata, I'm reading Mahabharata cover to cover, and it's fascinating to see that how painstakingly the text dwells on dharma dilemmas. But then I sent a paper to a Western ethics journal with the two narratives, and they said, well, these are stories. And I said, yes, this is a different methodology. You send it to somebody who knows Indian philosophy, then let's talk. You can't send it to somebody who had never read Indian philosophy. So I think those kind of methodology are very important in understanding dharma, understanding Indian religions, understanding Indian philosophy. So now, the 10 elements of personal and social well-being, this is sadharana dharma. So I'm going to focus on 8 because the benevolent intellect and vidya, spiritual knowledge, are cultivated through living a good life, a very pure life. So I am not going to talk about the and vidya, spiritual. I'm going to show you that how these 8 elements, virtues, are relevant in today's world. In a world where we are going so fast, and it is the modern psychology and studies of science, they're showing why these virtues are important in today's world. So I'm just going to spend 5-6 minutes on that. So these are, dharma is a comprehensive ethical system. So I generally understood as a varnashrama dharma or sadharana dharma, just be good, be nice, be kind, be loving, but not in a way that is entire knowledge system, ethical system. And it's for personal well-being and sustaining social and cosmic order. So both are interrelated. If the house is in order, the things will go better in life. If my personal life is in order, home is in order, society is in order, generally that should help. So the first is patience. Generally people are not patient, what I have encountered, especially in the West. The language we use, I want to grab a bite. How do you grab a bite? Just go, and I'm going to drop in. I have to run. All the time is, I have to run. I said, calm down, just walk, don't have to run. So everything is impatient, standing on the drive-by, burgers or sandwiches. It's, just never patient. The world has lost patience. And so he said, good things really do come to those who wait. So a lot of studies shown that children who wait for their candy, they're better students. And so many, so I don't have time for that. So you have to, rather than having 5 candies now, and parents say, we'll give you 10, wait for an hour. And the one who waits 5 doesn't do so well in school. So this is a very followed study, so what I'm showing you. And as virtues go, patience is quiet one. Of course it is quiet one. Sometimes people think you are just too lazy or too patient, but it's better mental health, better friends, helps in achieving our goals. So these are the research shows. And linked to good health, because when always got to run, got to grab a bite, is constant, our blood pressure is going up. Calm down, eat your food, it's okay. About patience, stricter research has found that not only are patient people are more cooperative, equitable, and forgiving, but their calm demeanor meant by they were less likely to report symptoms of depression, loneliness, and other negative emotion, and so on. And I do experiment with these things. I study Gandhi, I teach Gandhi, so his experiments with truth. And so I try to experiment in my own life, see how this all works out, and it's fascinating to see. And I have my students do those experiments as well. Okay, you're doing so good, let's be patient. Okay. So, Shama. Forgiveness, we think, is a kind of, all traditions say that. It's not Indian Dharma system's monopoly. You know, forgiveness, sometimes people think forgiveness is weak, and it's good to hold on to your heart because you're just so angry at the person. And it says, there are a lot of studies on forgiveness, that all these health, mental health, reasons that one should forgive. It's not forgiving for the other, it's forgiving for yourself. And all, again, the Mahabharata, Ramayana, and all these stories, I mean, how Rama forgives Kekai, just without even thinking about it. So I think all those examples that show how to live a, cohesive life. And then self-control. I thought I won't get that much on self-control, but I did find that it is a meaningful life, the surprising existential benefits of self-control. And sorry?
In a consumer society, self-control is
Yes, yeah, that's considered, so it shows that, again, mental health, physical health, psychological health, all these are important. This one? Okay. So the forgiveness, if you see the symbol, this is from this article, that when we don't forgive, we are chained to hatred. And we are the one who are in shackles. So it's very important to think about that. And then sense control. People routinely apply self-control to conquer diverse challenges in life, including losing weight, breaking habits, managing emotions, and persisting in difficult tasks. So I just taught a class last semester on philosophy of peace and nonviolence. And one student studying Gandhi, forgiveness, all different dimensions of nonviolence, and she goes, I'm going to apply this to lose weight because it is very important. I always blame on thyroid or other things which are important, but I'm going to take control of myself. So it's fascinating. I didn't tell anyone. I don't, because I'm in a California State University. We don't give advice like to anyone. So the truth, satya. We have a problem with truth in today's world. We call it post-truth world, right? The truth is gone. Now AI is creating images that are so lies, and people are afraid. I'm very afraid of who is going to put what on the social media or this. So, but they said, telling fewer lies linked to better health and relationships. Not even completely being truthful, like Itihasa, but telling fewer lies. Because what happens when we lie, we are trying to always are scared that our truth will be revealed. So our lie will be revealed rather. So it's very, very important that they have seen that physical and mental health benefits for those people who speak truth. A little controversy that honesty is a virtue. It is an excellence of character. It is also promotes trust, fosters healthy relationships, strengthens organizations and societies, and prevents harm. And then it says, honesty has fallen out of fashion, yet it is essential to self-improvement. So yeah, why is it fallen out of fashion? Because anything goes to this world. And non-stealing, of course, also this has been researched that it creates to take note of how you could be stealing in everyday life. If I take 10 more minutes, I'm stealing the next person's time. So that's not true. So I think it's very important. And it creates more space, mental and physical. And when we have too much, also too much according to Gandhi is stealing as well, so that we need to create space for others. And then lastly is creating inner and outer cleanliness. Purity of mind, freedom from negative emotions and thoughts, freedom from unhealthy emotions, and purity of body. It is very, very important, not for just physical health, but mental health, economic health, all kinds of. So the Dharma simplified. So these 8 elements are simplified by all these three Dharma tradition, Buddhist, Yogic, and Jain, and these are the little difference here. Most of it is same, and then they add, instead of Prigraha, abstaining from intoxicating substances. The Buddha says that because he saw that these are also problems that people should not follow. So last, how do I navigate my Dharma? So Dharma with the Dharma Drashti. Dharma texts are not prescriptives, thou shalt not. They just give you teaching. They are not dogmatic. That's test of dharmas. Think about what path leads to harmony and compassion. Whenever we are in a problem, when you say, what can I do? What Gandhi said, look at the poor person's face, his last words, and see what you ought to do. It depends on time, space, and ability. Dharma is more than caste and creed. It is an inner calling. And it's the inner calling that we need to really have all 8 virtues in order to find what path I should follow. Dharma is integrity, it is discipline, it is joy, it is service. And this is very important to see that it is integrity, discipline, joy, and service. So the sage Jajali talks about, if you know the story, he's great compassion. He has a big dreadlocks, and the birds make little home in his babies give eggs on his head, and he just stays still until they hatch the eggs, then they fly out. So I think he's a great compassionate being. So my realization. Dharma is a complete knowledge system that guides to achieve moral, physical, legal, social, and spiritual harmony and flourishing. To know Dharma is to know the universe as an ethically charged karmic system of cause and effect. Every action that is undertaken, down to the most seemingly insignificant thought, has repercussions, from harming an ant to saying unkind words. To know Dharma is to be aware of this characteristic quality of reality and one's place in the universe in relation to the other individuals and beings, and to comport oneself accordingly already. So Dharma, a comprehensive knowledge system for well-being. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. I was expecting something more from Gandhi also, but we got stuck into definition of Dharma. I think in that list, if you can just compare this 10 paramita, 10 perfections of Buddhism, that will be an interesting comparison how these are different. And but for this contemporary time, we should include few more things. Like we always talk about shared co-prosperity, and without that, see, the human civilization cannot survive, cannot sustain in your dharma term. So for that, there is one term in Sanskrit, master, yeah. Just cling to one's own property. So that not to have master, that too should be there, because even if you are good, but you cannot make a moral society if you don't know how to share. Second, because this is also age of creativity, innovation. If you don't innovate, you are gone. So innovation, creativity, and third thing is daring to rebel. That should be also now it's open.
Counterculture, like culture is also done. They just.
I didn't say it wasn't.
Yes.
I didn't say it wasn't, right? I always say it sounds so inclusive. It is so many facets are, and how do you live life, right? I mean, that's not what so this is just a very part of my overall of my studies. And all these.
So I was perplexed that the Honorable Supreme Court took the doctrine of rule of law from US. In India, it implemented in Anwar Ali Sarkar versus State of Saurashtra. So I was perplexed that why you have always the tendency to borrow. Rather, the Indian Supreme Court has the opportunity to put forward the rule of Dharma. As I said, Indian Constitution is a hollow document. So we can do a comparative analysis on this topic as well. Even I am willing to.
And any other question? So we move to the next presentation. Professor has been distinguished lecturer in South Asian Studies Yale University. She got then Londa Fellowship in Anthropology. So many achievements. But I know her because of her work on Ministry. And now today she will be talking on reimagining history, ethics and aesthetics of Kavya.
Thank you. Namaskar everyone, it's a great pleasure to be here today addressing all of you. From the very contemporary presentation that Veena ji gave us today, I'll take you now to early India. Not all that ancient as you might fear, but about the early medieval period or so, but raising essentially aspects or concepts that resonate with Veena ji's presentation as well, and you'll soon see why I say that. Now my paper, as I said, it is reimagining history, so Itihasa, and proposing how we can understand Kavya as Itihasa. So this is a deeply Sanskrit-based paper. I propose dismantling the false opposition between poetry and history that has been globally enforced by a post-Enlightenment positivist hegemony over the discipline of history. Departing from the empiricist valorization of indicators supposedly diagnostic of historicity in a text, such as facticity and objectivity, this paper embraces the very aspects of literary figuration or poetic figuration, such as rhetoric and didacticism, that modernist, quote-unquote, scientific history has rejected in pre-modern Indic texts. Drawing on early Indian epistemological traditions, this paper posits the Sanskrit poet, the Kavi, as a historian. It argues that a clear enunciation of poetry as history is to be found in Sanskrit poetics and in its vision of the true nature of time and human action. I presume you all are aware that this statement comes in the background of this very widespread and lingering misconception and fallacy that early Indians did not know history, could not write history. So from that negationist position to a place where I now clearly state that Sanskrit poetics in fact has a very clear enunciation of what history is, and it goes about implementing it. Now, underlying this historical vision that you find in Sanskrit Kavya of history was not some fetish for facts, but an ethico-political discursivity, a model of orthopraxis pivoted on justice, dharma, order, and a call to action, karma, which framed Kavya's organization of historical knowledge. So these became the orienting principles, as it were, of looking at the past. I show that among Kavya's objectives was upadesha, or instruction about worldly affairs, so that Sanskrit poetry reimagined history as not merely a bunch of sterile facts, but as a flow of ethical exemplars. Now, this claim in pre-modern India on behalf of the poetic vision as a historical vision is important to underline because mainstream modern scholarship has not acknowledged Kavya as history, but merely as the realm of aesthetics. I have written elsewhere in my first book on how aesthetics in themselves have thereby been misconstrued and misinterpreted as empty, sterile constructs, rather than as deeply symbolic, meaningful notions. One of the reasons for this situation that Kavya has been deemed to have nothing to do with history is that after Leopold von Ranke in the late 19th century and the European Enlightenment more generally, the discipline of history came to acquire enduring overtones of objectivism and scientificism. Thus, literature's figurative and subjective modes, so figurative and subjective modes of apprehending and rendering reality and truth, such as intuition, symbolism, myth-making, and didacticism, suffered a slide from recognition. And when positivism mingled with imperialism through the likes of James Mill and others in the early 19th century who denied any sense of history or even rationality to colonized India, it ended up downgrading and delegitimizing indigenous Indian narratives of the past and traditional modes of history. This paper, and indeed several of my books, attempt to readdress this situation vis-a-vis Kavya. So let's begin with asking now, who or what is the Kavi? The earliest work on Sanskrit etymology, the Nirukta by Yaska, 5th century BCE at least, gives the meaning of Kavi as Kavihi Kranta Darshano Bhavati. That is, the poet is the true seer, the sage, the seer. And this word seeing is extremely important, I'll tell you why. Now, this was 5th century BCE. It is a testament to the continuity of this semantic tradition that even 1500 years later, the Kashmiri rhetorician Bhattetoda, he was the preceptor of Abhinav Gupta, was explicating the idea of the Kavi in identical terms. Let me quote, "None a poet who is not also a seer." So none a Kavi who is not also a Rishi. A seer is so called because of his vision, darshana, I'm still quoting, darshana, which is knowledge of the true nature of entities and their varied states of being. And it is because of his vision of the truth that the seer is declared a poet. So why is the Rishi called a Kavi? Because of the same vision of the truth. The conventional meaning of the word poet, for its part, the quote continues, is derived from the Kavi's capacity for vision, darshana, as well as his powers of description, varnana. Unquote. Similarly, the great Rajashekhar in the 10th century Kavya Mimamsa spoke of how, quote, poets explore with their words that which yogins see through the power of their spiritual accomplishments, unquote. There are many other examples I could give you. We simply don't have the time, but I have written about it extensively in a couple of my books. What this tells us is that the Kavi's special insight was a steady article of faith for generations of poets. But insight into what exactly? We're talking of history, right? So insight into what? Insight into the reality of things. Sarva samvedyan bhavan. So it's one thing to look and it's another to truly see. And the word that the text uses, pashya. So the seeing, the act of truly seeing, is not merely a physical act or an empirical act. It is actually a deeply subjective act of cognition, of comprehension. Now, thus Kalhana, the 12th century Sanskrit Kavi, says, Sat Kavi Krityam Andham Jagatvam Vina. The world is in darkness without the illumining work of the good poet. In particular, the deeds of kings, he says, would be lost forever were it not for the poet who resurrects and embodies their glory, Yashaha Kayaha, through his words and favor. So, Anugraham Kavi Karmane. Now, Bilhana, Ratnakara, and so on, many other poets say exactly the same thing. Now, this assertion of the dependence of the king, who is the patron, on the poet, rather than the other way around, is important to note because it contradicts the stereotype that rather supercilious modern scholars have cultivated of the ancient poet passively prostrating before his courtly patrons. You know what Didi Kosambi infamously called mouthbirds, a housebird of patricians. He called the Kavi a housebird of patricians, meaning the Kavi was merely mouthing what his patrons wanted him to say. Contrary to this characterization, ancient Kavis in fact emerge as self-assertive and opinionated vis-a-vis the political order vested in the monarch. But as the poet also proceeds to tell us, it is not just the royalty, but speaking of all matters past. Bhutartha Kathanam. That is the job of the Kavi. Hence, Kavya Deepam Bhutavastu Prakashakam. That is, Kavya is the lamp that illumines matters of the past, as the Sanskrit Kavi Shri in the 15th century put it. So we are warming up to how Kavya actually has a very concrete idea of what it is doing vis-a-vis the display of history. However, the Kavi's access to the past is not merely by way of illuminating it. So Kavya Deepam, it is not the only function of Kavya's history. In a striking constructivist approach to the past and to the pursuit of its knowledge, the poet is understood to be not just the knower, but even the creator of the past. So Kavi Prajapati. Now, this is a highly sophisticated understanding of history we are getting into now. Thus Kalhan writes, quote, "Who else is capable of making visible pratyakshatam, bygone times, except the poet-creator who can make delightful productions, Ramya Nirmana," unquote. And mind you, Kalhan is merely repeating the understanding in a host of other poets and poeticians before him. So Bana, Anandvardhana, Abhinav Gupta, Kuntaka, they have all said the same thing. Here again then is Sanskrit Kavya's belief in the poet's creative ability to make the unobservable past perceptible, pratyakshatam. And this is indeed the quintessential historical function. Equipped thus with complete authority over the past and over its true nature and meaning, the Kavi often proceeds to instruct the present, either directly or symbolically. Now here is where another crucial component of the Kavi's engagement with history comes into the foreground, namely the ethical discursive, or what is called the didactic. Now, the didactic in Sanskrit Kavya has often been regarded as, by modern scholars, as some kind of conventional rhetorical superfluity, or as Professor Romila Thapar puts it, even a residual symptom of the poet's Brahmanical allegiance to the concept of Dharma, never as possibly a central part of Kavya's mandate, not even when it is such a significant and recurrent strain in a deemed historical Kavya like the Rajtarangani, as I will show. I, on the other hand, submit that the didactic is inseparable from the aesthetic, and it is the combination that made Kavya so powerful a politico-literary phenomenon. As I have argued elsewhere, Kavya's objectives went beyond the aesthetic. So Kavya is certainly, I assumed at the beginning, perhaps I shouldn't have, that you know that Kavya stands for poetry and prose, very broadly speaking. Now clearly this is highly aestheticized language use, linguistic use. So no doubt we are looking at aesthetics, but the objectives of Kavya went well beyond the aesthetic. Among its stated objectives was lokasya anukarana, that is, mimesis of the world, following what the world is doing and repeating that, replicating that, representing that in the poetry and prose. And a second function, upadesha, or instruction. About what? About worldly affairs, encapsulated in the concept of trivarga, which refers to dharma, artha, kama. In other words, the entire spectrum of human goals and activities, broadly piety, power, and pleasure. From Bharata, as you might know, is the author of the Natya Shastra, deemed the earliest work on dramaturgy in India. So from Bharata in the 2nd century CE, who spoke of Vechakshanya, who spoke of Upadesha, this very word Upadesha, in the Natya Shastra, and Bhama in the 5th century, who spoke of Vechakshanya in his Kavya Alankar, to Bhoja in the 11th century, who uses the term adhyayam, or lesson, in the Shringara Prakash. This contemplative, educative function of Kavya remained a constant refrain among Sanskrit poets. Abhinav Gupta, the 10th century doyen, clearly states that the purpose of the savoring of Kavya Rasa, or poetic rasa, is instruction in Dharma and the other Purusharthas. So a persistent socio-ethical pedagogy is what I want to draw your attention to. a socio-ethical pedagogy is a primary concern of this entire genre of Sanskrit literature called Kavya. So we are slowly seeing where we are going with this very holistic idea of history that Kavya has put together. So we've learned that they deem it a construction about the past, and it is the poet's deep insight that actually equips him to access that past and its true meaning. And now we are slowly getting to a deeper function of history as per Sanskrit poetry, and that is instruction or upadesha. Indeed, the Indic tradition had always known this. Hence, you have the widely cited definition in the Puranas. And this is so well known, and yet somehow this has not found its way into modern understandings of history or how we teach it in the classroom. What is this definition of this verse that circulated fairly extensively in early Indic texts? Dharmartha kama mokshanam upadesha samanvitam katha yuktam puravrittam itihasam prachakshate. What does it translate into? Narrations of the past, the stories you were talking about. Narrations of the past that are in a story form, katha yuktam, and equipped with instruction, upadesha samanvitam. And upadesha in what? It tells you piety, power, pleasure, and liberation, moksha, are called itihasa. So narrativity here is invested with historical meaning. And I'm going to take that argument forward. I argue that it is this narrative didacticism that framed not only the rhetorical but the historical agenda of Kavya. The coalescing of didactic with historical functions via poetry meant that the model of epistemic truth generated by Kavya was both transcendent in invoking higher ethical purposes and contingent insofar as it was located in a referentially adduced historical past. So I'm arguing that Kavya's understanding of history is both transcendent and contingent. What do I mean? Let me illustrate this by the example of the one Kavya that has been accepted as historical by modern scholars, but for reasons entirely external to its existence as poetry. So reasons that had nothing to do with it being poetry at all. And I've written extensively on this in my book, The Making of Early Kashmir, Landscape and Identity in the Rajtarangani, and also my recent one, which is Bharat Before the British and Other Essays Towards a New Indology. So I'm not going into those details here about what is the problem with how the Rajtarangani has been reconstructed and understood by 200 years of empiricist scholarship. Basically, they have completely transformed and hijacked this work of poetry in the rush to make it out to be the only work of history in entire ancient India. So, in appearing to be complementing this text, in fact, what the scholarship has achieved is segregated it from its own literary culture and identified features of historicity in it which were not important to the text itself. And in the process, given up, completely jettisoned, if not actually demolished, criticized, those aspects in the text which were clearly important to it, namely the didacticism. And of course the rhetoric, the resort to karma, the belief in myths. So I could give an entire lecture on myth itself and how it has been completely misunderstood and dismissed and disowned by our own scholars. Whereas it continues to be a central cultural form by which we can actually access how early Indians, in fact even contemporary Indians. We don't have a Sanskrit word for it, but I do have a book, so you might want to look at that. It's called Myths and Places, New Perspectives in Indian Cultural Geography. I'm not even going into myth here today. As a part of Kalhan's vision of history, it is a big part of it. And of course it's there in these different books. But I'm focusing very clearly on your didacticism here. Because I argue that even the use of myth in Sanskrit Kavya is not an act of credulity, is not a lapse of rationality, but is in fact a very purposive use of a strategy to again convey a didactic or ethical lesson relating to something that was clearly very important to the community that was authoring these myths. It is not for modern scholars to pick and choose which aspects of early Indian society or culture is acceptable and which is not. We have to embrace the totality of early Indic visions if we have to truly understand them. So, Kalhan's Raj Tarangini, a much celebrated but misunderstood text in 12th century Sanskrit, for those of you who don't know. Now, I put to you that far from empiricist qualities of the text, it is precisely through its poetic means and poetic devices, which as a matter of fact constitute the bulk of the text, that the Raj Tarangini achieves historicality. So not just because it gives you dates, not because it so-called believes in causality, not because it claims to be, scholars believe it claims objectivity, it doesn't. That's a complete misunderstanding of the text and its vision and the poet. Objectivity is the most anachronistic notion that there can be if applied to a 12th century text. The text is clearly partisan. It is not objective, it doesn't aspire to be objective. It is partisan. And partisan of what? Partisan of virtue, partisan of dharma, and using that to evaluate history. So let's not shy away from that because of our 21st century concerns about, as Veena ji also said, sacred versus secular, and so on and so forth. Those would be impositions in the past. So I argue that actually it is these poetic devices that the Raj Tarangini uses to achieve historicality. What do I mean? Very quickly. Apart from recording all the different royal dynasties of the ancient kingdom of Kashmir, the Raj Tarangini evaluates governance and kingship according to certain moral principles with which the Kavi frames his composition. This ethicized commentary runs through the text, unifying his account in a moral logic. So I'm drawing your attention to an aspect of the text that despite 200 years of intensive attention by world scholarship, it has been completely missed. There is a moral logic that actually unites the Raj Tarangini, and it is this unity of plan that characterizes the Raj Tarangini as a poetic and historical narrative. So there's a unity of plan. That's what a narrative is essentially. In his very first chapter, Kalhana in fact declares this organizing principle of his vision, which happens to be both historical and ethical. So it continues to boggle my mind that it's there in the very first chapter of the text. How was it completely missed by so much scholarship? Now what does he tell us? In so many words, quote, "From time to time, due to the spiritual merit of the subjects, punya, kings appear who organize a kingdom that is sunk deep in disorder. Durotsannasya mandalasya yojanam kriyate." Order. Those who are intent on harassing their subjects, praja pidanam, perish with their families. On the other hand, fortune awaits even the descendants of those who reinstate order where there is chaos. So, reinstating order where there is chaos. This is the feature of each tale given here. So, the poet is telling you, if you only listen, prativrittantam lakshanam. He's telling you that every story I'm narrating in the next 8,000 verses, this is the running theme. Single-minded application in protecting the subjects is the sacred duty of kings. Prajanupalanen ananya karmata bhubritam vratam. So we are actually going into the deeper layers of what dharma means for this text. What dharma means for this text, and that is praja anupalanam. People's welfare, 12th century, ladies and gentlemen, but people's welfare as a central element of defining Rajadharma in this context. Ensuring these didactic aims were meant to be a series of qualities of the king: good conduct, sadacharaha, righteousness, sata, generosity or liberality, dakshinya, discriminating intellect, encouraging men and women of merit, character and learning, and the will to enforce justice or dharma, and the absence of fear or abhaya among the subjects. What happens after that? Then the poet takes these values and plots them in Kashmir's past through a series of kings as exemplars that he identifies. And he often arranges these kings in pairs, elucidating their comparative morality. So you have the hedonist Vibhishana, king of Kashmir, who was succeeded to the throne by his son Siddha, the Puritan. The violent Mihirakula, succeeded by the righteous Bakar. The just Chandrapir, by the tyrannical Tarapir. And the debauched father and son, Kalasha and Harsha, by the high-minded and high-souled Uchchara. Now, these are all historical kings, mind you, separated by centuries from each other, but connected by the Kavi's hermeneutical scheme. In fact, I argue that the title of this poem, Raj Tarangini, which literally means River of Kings, is an allusion to history as precisely this flow of ethical exemplars. This schematic organization of the text, articulating the poet's ethicized vision, is strikingly apparent when its didacticism and rhetoric are not dismissed. It is here that the Raj Tarangini displays what Hayden White has called narrativization, or the configuration of historical facts around a plot structure that endows an otherwise random set of data with a unified structure and meaning, thereby rising above mere seriality. So chronicles are not the same as history. A chronicle is merely a succession of facts and events, but history is this deeper meaning that is lent to a work by Kavya by narrativizing it. And narrativity in the Raj Tarangini, therefore, I argue, embodies the poet's vision of the past, endowing that past with culturally sanctioned meanings. So this is not a sterile concept of history at all. This is a very rooted understanding of what history is and should be. Further, building on this, Kalan offers a larger critique of power. So this is a monarchical text, and Kalan is definitely a monarchist. But that doesn't mean he is unequivocally or blindly a supporter of monarchy. He actually provides you a deep critique of power. And this actually deepens the text's concern for ethics, and that is why I'm talking about it. So he has this, one of his characters in the Raj Tarangini, he has him soliloquize like this, quote, and Chairman sir, I'm almost finished, so allow me to give this quote in entirety. Quote, "There is perhaps no man who, having been at first shown favour by royal fortune, has later not been harassed by her, as by the friendship of the vulgar. She," now she here is referring to Shri, that is royal fortune. "She who is without affection has never followed kings in death when they, without friends or provisions, are en route for the next world. Gold vessels of the banquet and other articles collected in the treasury, how is it that those kings who have departed for the next world no longer own them? Torn from the necks of those enemies about to die, the necklaces, accursed and unholy, for whom are they an attraction? Predecessors have left behind ornaments defiling them with hot tears of anguish when about to die. While touching them, who does not have a qualm?" Unquote. Elsewhere in the Raj Tarangini, the Kavi keeps commenting along the same lines. Quote, "Even after realizing the transient nature of existence, asthai neem sthitim, fools do not give up ambition, seduced as they are by the attractions of treacherous fortune. But on the same path of death is every individual plunging headlong. I am the slayer and he the slain." You can hear the echoes of the Gita. "I am the slayer and he the slain. The notion of a difference between the two lasts but a short while. He who but yesterday exults while slaying his foe, at the end of his life sees an enemy gloating over him when he is himself about to be killed. How awful, fie on this illusion. Unquote. Now, what is all this? Essentially, this is the Rajtarangani's discourse on the themes of mortality and evanescence. And both of these can be seen as a profound deposition on temporality itself, on time, and its ever-attendant quality, change, which is that fundamentally historical character of time. A certain universality and inevitability then attached to the march of history in this poetic vision as also a coming together of transcendent and contingent truths. So let me sum this up very quickly for you. Kavya's representation of history could operate in a way that was both literal in what it asserted about past events and figurative. So you don't have to choose. To be history, you don't have to give up being poetry. That is the point. Literal in what it asserted about past events and figurative in what it suggested about the meaning of that experience. Whether in his normative prescription of power or in his philosophical critique of it, the Kavi made masterly use of his chosen genre to spin out a discourse about the past. In implotting the past around the principle of moral order, he narrativized it. And it is in narrativizing the past that he historicized it. By lending shape and meaning to a vast stretch of time, 2,500 years at least have been talked about in this text, and the countless historical figures and events entailed by it. So for the Sanskrit Kavi, writing history did not exhaust truth. Ethicizing reality was the larger aim. Hence the larger project of creating ethical monarchy and governance, and ultimately unveiling the transcendent end of human life, detachment. Not as a goal in itself, but as a wider insight into the true nature of time and human action. It took a Sanskrit Kavi, ladies and gentlemen, to see and show all these meta-historical truths. Thank you very much.
Information on flowers, on natural history, on places, on ethics. And when you combine all that, it's an amazing document. And I said you have to read between the textures of the text. Because nothing is stated, and it's the same methodology we have to employ when we are reading ecology in June.
रामायण खत्म बिना कवि कालिदासा भारत भारत नहीं he said in 4th century he said in 4th century not today
कालिदास in 5th century लेकिन ये ऐसे नहीं लिखता हूँ मैं उन्हें संस्कृत के इसमें मार नहीं कवि कालिदास जी को
so that's not even it is there what is it about Sanskrit
कोई यंग स्कॉलर थी हाँ
yeah, I have 2 points. One, you said that kavi, the word kavi, and second question is that when you say that we see history in the person, we see history in this narrative as it's linked. How can you analyze the historical events which were there in the Vijaya Kavya? Many Vijaya Kavyas are there, and there are Itihasa. And you pick the historical facts. Is that what is challenging for us?
I'm going by your words.
Yeah. Why we are picking? Because
May I answer, please? The idea, what I'm actually proposing and going for, is that you have to begin to read these texts and in fact genres as a totality. So whether it is the Purana, whether it is the Shatalis, genealogy there, and the form is Kavya, right?
yeah.
So it is the fecundity of the genre Kavya that actually allows this prodigious amalgamation of everything that is deeply those continuities of belief, as it were.
Let's take an example. So Purana says that there was someone called Vishnu Sharma was there, and he was doing that.
Because I thought of speaking something on Professor Kaul's paper, and I will be sharing my own thoughts on this interplay of history and poetry. By the way, I am a poet, but I have very poor understanding of history. But both history, it involves category of time, and poetry attempts to transcend time. So now we have to first understand the nature of time itself, and the whole confusion will be clear. As per Surya Siddhant, time had two modes, Kalatmak and Kalanaatmak. Kalanaatmak is computational. So Kalanaatmak, you can measure it from micro level of Sukshma, Chan, blinking of eyes, crackling of fingers, Angul Asphotan, Swas, Vinadi, Nadi, Muhurt, Ahorat, Paksh, Mas, Vers, Samvatsar, 60-year Jupiter cycle, Yud and Mahayud. In this mode, time is measurable. In the Kalatmak mode, phase change, time consumes everything. Both in the dissipative mode, that is Kalatmak, as well as computational mode, there is always a sequence crumb, which is algorithmic in nature. In computational mode, we have that sequence of Atit, Vartaman and Anagat, future. Whereas in the dissipative mode, that Kalatmak, where everything is consumed in course of time, this sequence is of Utpatti, Adhikar and Lay, that is arising, authority and dissolution. History concerns with the computational mode of time. History relies on facts. Poetry concerns more with ethics and aesthetics. Evocation of feelings, that is Ras Nispatti, is the ultimate goal of any poetic composition, as Professor Johanna was mentioning, and this was established by our Kashmiri aestheticians like Anand Vardhan and his successor Abhinav Gupta. If one wants to link history as flow of ethical exemplars, it is only capturing the dissipative mode of time. And in flow of time, constant dissipation takes place. Ethics provides a code of conduct to only slow down the degeneracy that takes place in course of time. Professor Kaul mentioned about poets having an unparalleled epistemic authority via their poetic intuition, pratibha, and divine insight, divinity. That was in your extract. You didn't mention here.
20 minutes, sir, is
So this poetic intuition is a gateway to Anand Bhog. History, on the other hand, concerns itself with fact-based material world. History concerns with the Laukic and poetry concerns with alaukic. Yaska, about whom we are debating, he interpreted Rigvedic narratives as Itihasa, Akhyan and Gatha. And these three not as representation of the external natural events and objects, but as construct of linguistic metaphors. For Yaska, Itihasa is not empirically very fiable history, but that does not mean that in India there was no tradition of positivist history writing. In fact, writing chronicles, though she is arguing that chronicles is not same as history, then you can take on Vanshavali, but that sense of chronologizing the facts from the past, that has been invoked in India. It may be in Kashmir, but also in Assam, Buranji chronicles from 13th century. In most of the compositions, the composer of the text would add a colophon in which historical facts and personal history used to be recorded. The kings would erect pillars with material inscriptions providing calendrical details. The king would issue coins commemorating their reign or certain time shifts like coming of new Samvatsar. For example, even a barbaric king like Mahmud Ghazni, he issued bilingual coins when new Samvatsar cycle started in 1027 AD. And the text written in Sanskrit in Mahmud Ghazni's coin, that was in Salda script, and it says, Abhyaktang Ekang Muhammad Avatar Nipati Mahmuda. That translates to the invisible Abhyaktam is one, Muhammad is his avatar, and Mahmud is the king. One cannot take records of mere etymological roots and stall the march of scientific history writing. For example, Siksha is a Vedanta, But this Shiksha concerns in Vedanta with phonetics and different traditions of pronunciations. Today, one cannot question the whole Shiksha pranali of Bharat and say that this is anti-Bharat. Now Shiksha is being used for not only general education but also for moral education, instruction, Naitik Shiksha. Similarly, even though Itihasa for Yaska was merely construct of linguistic metaphors, but now this term Itihasa connotes what Western scholars term as history or herstory. If some scholars find the term not relevant, history itself can be translated as Tathyatmakam or Tathyatit Shastra, with the Atit based on Tathya, facts. As history writing cannot be left over to poetic intuition. History is comic and poetry had this nature of liberating from prison of time. Kram and Kaul are entwined together. History that scholars interpret is this recapitulating facts sequentially. Poetry has been seen as a body in Indian classical tradition, just as Professor Jonna had shown in the beginning. Hence, poetry had to be ornamented to enhance its beauty. But if it has a body, then it should also give ananda. Thus, in Sanskrit poetics, there has been a gradual shift from mere figure to the soul of poetry. When Anand Vardhan was reflecting on intellectual milieu of his time, he would have been surprised that Siddha poetry, that is Charyapada, those lacked classical poetic embellishments, but still those could produce chill and thrill among the audience. Anand Vardhan could realize that there is more to poetry than mere ornamentation. Therefore, in his magnum opus Dhvanyalok, the very first sloka, he declared, Kavyasya Atma Dhvani Iti. Dhvani is the soul of poetry. Dhvani produces nuisance, that is rasa. Abhinav declares, Rasa Dhvani is the soul of poetry. Poetry should be allowed the access to unthought, unseen, unexperienced, anagat, and objectant. My own view is that let poetry serve the soul and let history serve the identity. I was going through Chandogya Upanishad and I was surprised to find that the Mahavakyam Tattvam Asi has been repeated just like in Julius Caesar's yes, Buddha says he was ambitious and sure he is an honorable man. So that way, it's not only Tattvam Asi, the whole phrase, stranger, that has been repeated in Chandogya Upanishad in the sixth book 9 times. So, this is an example of use of epimony. So only yesterday I was trying to find out whether there is some alankar or which reflects in epimonic kind of instrument. I couldn't find. Sanskrit poetry itself is so rich and ornamented that thousands of scholars can continue to understand and refine this field. Let poetry take care of generating rasa through flight of imagination. In fact, even meditation, that is bhavana. Meditation is also known as bhavana in tantric literature. So it's different from this only bhav, emotion. Because that bhavana meditation, that is based on visualization, putting all your bhav. So even meditation, that is bhavana or sadhana, invokes kram, that is sequencing. Poetry cannot be an aid to even bhavana. Bhavana involves bimb nispatti, generation of images, and by that method it reaches the stage of ras nispatti. Poetry bypasses the whole process, no kram. Poetic pratibha can generate ras nispatti, that is rapture by rupture of sequences. That is what a poet aims for. In a way, poetry is akin to Mahamudra of tantric literature. History is for lesser mortals like us. Poetry is for superior beings. Let poets continue to write Akhyan, Gatha and Itihasa in the original sense of Nirukta. I am reminded of 10th century Japanese poet Kono Surayuki. He introduced his anthology of poems Kokin Wakasu, appreciating how the poetry has the power to move heaven and earth, stir feelings in unseen demons and gods, soften relations between man and women, and soothe the heart of fierce warriors. Martin Heidegger, as you know, he himself made a lot of reflections on poetry in his later phase. So after engaging in Indian philosophy, he proclaimed need for a planetary thinking based upon poetic dwelling. He felt the Western calculative thinking had uprooted man from the earth. Heidegger proclaimed the only possibility to save ourselves is by thinking and poetizing. And the essence of poetry is to point to something we cannot see, the objectum. In our own times, history itself is becoming poetic. Osama bin Laden was neutralized by pair of Obama and Biden. In last 100 years, only 2 times Japanese emperors have made public speeches. Once after Hiroshima, Emperor Hirohito, and again after Fukushima in 2011 by Emperor Akihito. And in this year 2025, we are witnessing hyperactivity across Atlantic. On one hand, there is this Donald Trump and Elon Musk, Donald and Musk. On the other side of Atlantic is Donald Tusk, Prime Minister of Poland in Europe, trying to bring people to trust. So let the flight of cognition and flow of emotion come together to rebuild communities and usher in a beautiful, prosperous and joyous world. Thank you very much.
We have to come to an end now, but I think, it's very good that this session has inspired discussions. Thank you, sir, for guiding us through the session, to all the speakers for their contributions, for giving us insights into their work, and for your active participation into to today's session, everyone. Thank you very much. Yes. And also to Shonaleeka Kaul.
जल्दी जाओ एक दे भी दिया है
And yes, and also thank you very much to Veena Howard.
I'm so excited.
And now Professor Vandana Mishra.
ग्रुप शॉट ले लेना